everyone, my name is Eric and I'm the developer of an upcoming action-adventure exploration platformer called Virtue's Heaven, which is a game about living at the end of history and fighting and punching things to create a future for everyone. The tagline still needs some work, but I'm getting there. The game's still kind of early in development and all that kind of jazz. But anyway, if you've already followed along for the development of my previous game, GB Roba, which came out last year in October, I'm trying to do something similar here to accompany this game's development, in that I'm trying to do like regular update videos where I talk a little bit about what my plans are, what I've been doing previously in the previous time span of whenever like the previous video came out and all that kind of stuff. And just like to give people an update on like how things are going and what my plans are and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's like the intention for these videos as well. With GB Roba, I did them on a weekly basis. I'm probably switching over, at least for now, to a monthly schedule for Virtue's Heaven, mostly because right now the game is in a state where like there's still like a lot of like preparatory work going on until I can switch over into like actual like, okay, now I'm in full production thing and things are moving along pretty rapidly. So I don't really want to do like weekly updates where like the difference between one week and the next is like, yeah, I figured out this one thing, and that's it. So my guess is that like with monthly update videos, I'll have a bit more substantial stuff to talk about. Also, there will be like additional like stuff if you're interested in like what this game's overall like direction and design is. Will be like on like my YouTube channel as well. I already posted a video where I like kind of played through like what's currently available. And talked a little bit about that, and I'm also going to be recording like another additional like video about where like go a bit more like detailed about like like the like overall idea and themes of what I want this game to be. So if you're interested in those and you're watching this video on YouTube, look at in the video description. There should be links down there to like the additional videos, or like if you're watching this on the Steam page of Virtue's Heaven, I'm also going to post these links down there, so you'll have a way to find those if you're interested in like learning more. Because I really don't want to like bog these videos down, these ones down in like ways where like first, okay, before I talk about like what I have been doing and what I'm planning, let's spend like an hour talking about what this game is going to be, because yeah, that's a bit weird. I'm already rambling enough in my life, and I don't think that this is like very productive for everyone. Anyway, so what I have been doing over the previous month. So like the Steam page for Virtue's Heaven was published on June 6th, I think. And a lot of like work in the previous, like in May, went into like preparing the launch of the Steam page. And then in June I was kind of like figuring out, okay, what do I want to do next and how do I want to progress from there, because at that point and until like basically the end of this month or at the end of July, Virtue's Heaven was basically in pre-production, this is how I called it at that point, because I was still kind of figuring out the overall structure of what I wanted this game to be and like how I wanted progression to work, because this game is kind of like, I'm calling it an action exploration or adventure platformer, because like this is like more like the description of what you're doing. The general term or the general description is like Metroidvania, which yeah, sure, but one reason why I'm trying to avoid that term also is because like the overall progression in Virtue's Heaven will work differently. I'm not gating progression through like via like restricting people's movement abilities or whatever. So which is why I'm like trying not to like invoke these terms too much, even though like it still happens and it's still in the Steam tags, because that's like it's similar games and like search engine, blah, 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 algorithm playing. But anyway, so I was still like figuring out, okay, how do I want this all to work? And I ended up with like an idea that I felt was very like something I'm fairly comfortable in doing, and like that gave me enough room to like on one end to know what structure I want, like having a set structure, but also giving me enough space to, for example, place optional areas in there and like optional objectives and all that kind of stuff. And then I set out, or like my goal then for July was to build out the first quote unquote real area of the game. So like one whole area, like larger section of the game's overworld or map, so to speak, and just like see how it feels, connect like everything that I wanted in this game to be like, to basically like form a whole, and again, I hate the term, a whole loop, so to speak. So what I want this game to be is you start at your home place, and then you go out into the world and you have to like collect a heart of like some powerful being. And there are like several hearts that you need to collect to like get access to the game's final area. And the loop, so to speak, is basically you go out, you start a path down, you have to traverse several areas and like fight several like smaller like bosses on the way to reach the area's like final boss, so to speak, which then gives you a heart. Then you travel back home, give the heart to the person who collects them, and get a permanent upgrade in return, and start the whole process again. There are like additional, like optional or like semi-optional things attached to them, which I'm calling conviction stages. Convictions are a part of like the way how the game handles like upgrades and power-ups, so to speak. And you find these in like separate stages where you have to free another character from a prison. And after you freed them from prison, they're giving you like their convictions, which is like a special ability that you can equip and that under certain circumstances activates and gives you like additional benefits and all that kind of stuff. If you want to know more details about that, again, take a look at the walkthrough of the whole area where I like explain the conviction system in more detail and like what my idea behind that is. Again, I'm trying not to do that here because it might take a while and it's not like that relevant for now. At least I built out these stages, I created more NPCs and like tried to like find ways, okay, how do I want to connect these? What do I want these to be? And all that kind of stuff. And then I created like the permanent upgrade system, which is slightly different from the conviction system. And yeah, connected everything, and it was actually kind of interesting. Oh yeah, that was all planned. I'm already talking about what I already did and not what I planned. And obviously, another plan was don't fall into despair in the face of the sheer impossibility of everything. Which, yeah, okay, let's talk about what I did. Because like sometimes I did fall into despair, but that's normal in times like these. Anyway, so I have a fully functional, like basically like one loop through an area. The area is done, but it's not in a finalized state. So what I did to kind of speed the process of like me figuring out how I want these like this game's areas to feel and look like, I imported a bunch of assets from like previous projects, mostly from GB Rover, and just build it out. If you're watching the walkthrough video at some point later, you will maybe notice that, wait a second, at some point I'm fighting bosses from GB Rover. That's because I didn't want to build 3 boss fights completely just to try something and just to try how something feels. And then maybe end up like scrapping them or not using them at all. So what I did is I built out these areas. I reused a bunch of like tile sets and other things just to create like something where I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of reflecting the atmosphere that I want to have, kind of reflecting the aesthetic that I want to have, and kind of reflecting the anime encounters I want to have, and the boss fights I want to have, though those not as much. Just that I have a rough idea of what it's going to be, and then in later stages I will go back and replace all of these reused assets with bespoke things that fit more nicely into the final vision that I have. But this approach enabled me to create a bunch of stuff and create a much larger chunk of the game without spending weeks just creating assets, because this is like something, and this is like a big difference also to GB Robot, since this game is much larger. The sheer amount of stuff I have to create is much larger, and I realized it last week when I created the additional conviction stages and the stuff you have to do there, and then you have to create new I ended up having to go back into and okay, this needs an additional graphical asset, this needs an additional graphical asset, and it just balloons out. And obviously you have to do these things over the course of this game's development. But in the situation where I'm in, where it's right now it was just about creating something and seeing how it feels and seeing how it fits, and then making decisions and making informed decisions off of that. And by the way, this wasn't the first area that I created. Since March, I have created I would say 3.5 of different ideas of how I want the overall area progression to work. And this is basically the one where I ended up deciding, yeah, that's the one I want to go with. Because I think it again strikes a nice balance between having a fairly clear progression and giving me a fairly good idea, okay, how do I want these things to fit together, and at the same time having enough space and enough possibility space to create optional stuff and create branching paths and all that kind of stuff. So that's what was there, and again, theoretically it all works, theoretically it's playable, and it's you can see what this game is supposed to be. On an aesthetical level, there's still stuff that I need to replace and that I still need to do, because I'm not planning on reusing the GB Roba boss fights for this game, because first of all, those were bosses in GB Roba, and the GB Roba has already defeated them all, so they can't exist in a future game. Even though the world isn't exactly shared, but whatever. And also, the one thing I noticed is that some of the bosses are fairly difficult to fight when you're playing a character that has, on one hand, less health than GB Roba had, and not a really good way to do range damage. So that was kind of a rough, the fights are a bit rough to do, actually. With the exception of the one boss fight, that is bespoke, though I'm not sure if I'm going to put it where it is right now. It's probably something that I'll move around at a later point, because it was planned for a different area anyway. So that's kind of where that part is. I also in the process of connecting everything and figuring everything out, I realized, okay, I kind of now have to make decisions how I want this upgrade system to actually work. I had, again, rough ideas where yeah, I kind of want to do it like that or like this or whatever. And now I actually had to sit down and create something and have to make decisions about that, and kind of have to then understand that the decisions that you're making when you're building out a game will just narrow down the possibility space that you end up having with the game. Because again, if it's just ideation, everything is possible. At least, yeah, more or less everything is possible. I can't just think about something, think, yeah, it's very cool, and then either you try to start making and realize this is way too complex for what I'm going for, or you realize maybe it's not that interesting to do. And you end up narrowing down the possibility space, and having to confront myself with that, and telling myself, okay, this is what I want this to be. These are the kinds of permanent upgrades that I want them to be. This is what I want them to feel like. This is what I want the consequence of these things to be, and all that kind of stuff. And that's on one hand a difficult thing, because you have to make for yourself the decision, okay, this is what I want this game to be. And you kind of have to like put nails down into the ground and say, okay, this is it, and I'm not going to like go back. Or it's like, if I would to go back and change it, I would have to find a justification for it and a really good reason for it. Otherwise, it's just, you have to move forward when you're making a game. And I think that's like one of the big issues. And that's one of the issues I had with the previous versions of this game. This isn't the first time that I'm trying to make this game a reality. This is like the fourth or fifth time. And it always went nowhere in the past. And it mostly went nowhere, I realized, is because I never gave myself the space to try things out like I did with these previous areas that I built out, where I like tried different things. And also, I never then made the decision to say, okay, and this is what it is. It was always like kind of this, okay, I'm producing the game, and then I realized, no, I want it to be different, and then I like destroyed, basically erased a bunch of work and had to start all over again. And I don't want to fall into the trap with this game, because again, the overall scope of this project is fairly large, probably the largest that any of my commercial games have been by a fairly huge degree. And if I'm not planning this stuff carefully, I will end up with something that will take forever to be done, and I don't think that I'm able to do that. So I have to be conscious about, on one hand, giving myself the space to experiment and to figure out what I want these things to be. And like, as I said, like the previous 4 months have helped tremendously with that, despite like there being a lot of work that will end up not being used, like being discarded and whatever, but it's okay in that regard. And at the same time, now making the clear and informed decisions. Okay, this is what I want this to be. This is what I want this to look like. This is what I want this to communicate. And this is what in the end, is what I'm going to present to like whoever decides to buy this game. So this is like difficult stuff, and it's like hard to like come to a clear conclusion for this. And again, like in the sheer face of like the scope of the game and like the situation I'm in and all that kind of stuff, which then connects to the last point on this. I only fell into despair temporarily, which is every once in a while where I'm realizing that I'm pressuring myself too much to like, yeah, this game has to move forward in that way, and I have to do this and all that kind of stuff, which isn't really the case and is a very unhealthy way of approaching this, because a game's commercial success especially is like so much tied to stuff that is completely outside of your control. And the amount of like just like time and like energy I spend on like thinking about this stuff, about okay, how can I make sure that like people notice this game and are maybe interested in buying this and whatever, is like much more in like compares to like the overall like effect it has right now. And there's like a source of frustration, and then you're also like facing the fact that okay, and this game is going to be very large and is going to require a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of like energy and like just like investment on my part, like in terms of like time, and as I said, energy, not as much in terms of money because I don't have any. So there's a lot of like where it's hard to like stay on track, and at the same time, like don't just like say, what's the point of any of this? And like one thing that still keeps me going, or like that's like the main driving force, is that I'm like, at this point, I like the overall concept and idea of what I want this to be in the end so much, and like what I've built so far, even if it's just like very small and not quite there where I want it to be, but I can already see where it's going, and I really like the direction all of this is going, and I want to see this through to the end. So that's like kind of like the part where like which helps me with like not just like say, okay, like screw it all, I'm stopping with this, I'm like not doing anything and I'm just like going to lie in bed for all day. So that helped a lot, and in that regard also like finishing up this whole section and like actually finalizing these idea about like again like these larger ideas of how I want the overall progression in the game to feel, and it not just being a theoretical thing but like something that is in the game and that I can see and where I can like play around with the expressions and the atmosphere and all that kind of stuff is so much more interesting and so much more rewarding than it just existing in my head and thinking about, yeah, it would be so cool if it exists, but it's still so far away. And again, this is also the benefit of like reusing a bunch of stuff just to like create like a rough outline of what I have, because otherwise, again, I would probably still be busy with just creating graphical assets for this first area, and I wouldn't have even started building stuff. So in that regard, like I'm it feels like I'm not very far into it, because like there's again it's basically you're not even looking at like the rough like building or rough construction of a building, but more like, okay, this is like a fairly detailed sketch of what it's going to be, and now I have to like collect all the materials still, but at least it's in a state where I know how it's probably going to look like, and I don't have to basically tear down half of a building because I realized, oh, this isn't going to work. So in that regard, it's a much more, I think, healthy approach, despite like, again, realizing and like confronting myself with the fact that like in the overall like grand scheme of things, the game hasn't progressed in like in a linear way in the terms of like, okay, whatever, in March the game was like 20% done and now I'm at 50% done. That's not true. It was at 10% done and maybe now it's at 50% done. But in terms of like conceptualization and like, again, all that other kind of stuff, it's much further down. It's much further developed, and I think this is going to help me to like get everything like that. I'm fairly certain that if I can keep working on this in the way I've been working so far, is that like the overall things now will come together much more quickly than they have been over the past 3 to 4 months. Also, like another thing that helped me here is that with building out this whole area and seeing like and kind of trying to like simulate, okay, this is the process I have to go through, I can kind of gauge, okay, this is how long it'll probably take me to finish an area. So the rough outline of an area where it's like playable and all that kind of stuff, but like the assets themselves aren't like finalized, it'll probably take me around like 2 weeks to a month, depending on like how much energy and like concentration I have. And like my guess is that like the like completely finalizing an area will probably take me around 2 months, which is a good thing to know. And then planning around that and like trying to like schedule stuff and like how stuff goes. And this is like kind of what I want to do for this month, is to first of all finish connecting the last remaining areas or elements for the first area. There are like 2 more things that I want to like put in there. Maybe even build in a save system. I don't know if I want to do it quite yet. And then the next step for me is like basically trying to see if like I want to try a specific approach on how I want to like produce like the rest of this game. And the idea is to kind of work on 2 things at once to some degree. So on one end, I want to start figuring out the structure and the feel for the next area and start building out again a rough version of this area. And in parallel, I want to start working towards replacing all the temporary assets, so that basically in each month I start working towards like the rough version of like the next area, while also on different days working towards finalizing the previous area. What I'm hoping here is that this kind of prevents me from getting just tired of doing the same kind of work every day for like several weeks. So like one thing that always runs me of risk of just like where I'm just getting bored of a project is like when I'm confronted with a task where I know, okay, now it's like basically 2 weeks of just doing graphical assets, just doing tie sets, enemy sprites, and all that kind of stuff, and barely any like substantial design work. And that always trips me up. The same goes with okay, now it's like a week of just programming, which is also going to tire me out. So, but if I can manage to find a way where like basically I have a few days where I'm doing the design work, where I'm doing like work where it's about, okay, figuring out how to structure stuff and how to build out stuff and like trying this out. And on the other hand, having days where it's just about like creating animations and creating sprites and all that kind of stuff, and connecting and basically splitting these things up so that I don't have these periods of time where it's just like for like weeks on end, just the same task until it's done. And then I build the area within 3 days, and then it's back to another 2 weeks of doing pixel art and building an area within a week. So kind of trying to do that, trying to see, okay, does this work? Does this enable me to stay with this like for longer time without like getting tired of it? Or like, again, because like I have to like plan around this stuff, because again, I know this is going to take a while. And I also know that thanks to ADHD, I get tired of stuff. So I have to like find ways where I can kind of lessen the impact of me getting bored of my own projects and my own work, and like kind of like trying to keep things more exciting and more fresh, and like trying to like always have something new and interesting interspersed with all of this. The other part is like that I'm going to try to find ways to maybe get more money for this project. Like one thing I did is like on August 2nd, it was the 2nd, huh? Yeah, it was. I launched a Patreon campaign where it's like just about, yeah, help me fund this. There's like, I'm not expecting a lot of money out of this, but like in the situation where I am, even like a couple of bucks help a lot. So I did that, and I'm still thinking about trying to approach publishers with this, though I'm not very optimistic that it'll work, because like that's what my experience with previous attempts have told me, but who knows, really. Like you can't like, it's always better to try something and like get rejected than like doing the rejection for other people. So, and in the end of the day, I would I could really use the extra funds to, like, for example, pay for more music more quickly, pay the person who does the music a better rate than they're getting right now, and all that kind of stuff. Or who knows, maybe even paying someone else to also like help me with the graphical assets, because that's like probably just like in terms of like time that it takes, the part that takes the longest and that makes me tired the most, despite like I still enjoy it to some degree, but like just like from the sheer amount of stuff, it's the part that gets me like bored the quickest. So like getting some help there would be cool, but that requires money that I don't have. So like trying to find a way to do that, and also like trying to look into ways, okay, having a publisher also means that it's more likely that I get access to other platforms that I don't have, and that's also like kind of a nice thing. And like as always, another goal for me is to don't fall into despair in the face of the sheer impossibility of everything, which again is an ongoing thing, and I'm doing my best that this doesn't happen. So yeah, anyway, if you watched all of this, thank you very much for watching. Again, I'm trying to do these more or less on a monthly basis. If you want to know more about the game and how it's going, you can follow @Mokograd on Twitter, which is like basically the account where I'm just posting game update stuff. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel or follow the game's Steam page. You can also wishlist Virtua 7 on Steam. That would be incredibly cool. If you haven't done that already, that would be great. You can also support the game on Patreon. There's only one tier. It's like $5 a month, and you get access to like early versions of this game. like the stuff that I just talked about, like the first area and all that kind of stuff. Basically, once I've gotten around to like establishing like the download stuff and all that kind of stuff, I haven't done that quite yet, but I'll get around to it. You get access to that, more like in depth or like aside things about like the game's design or like in progress stuff and all that kind of stuff. And occasionally you'll get access to old abandoned versions of like previous games or like games that I never released or whatever. So that's also like a thing that I plan on doing. Again, it's all like in one tier for $5 a month. There aren't different tiers or whatever with different degrees of access because I don't believe in stratifying people based on their income. So if you are able to afford $5 a month for this, you'll get everything. And if you can't afford that, don't worry about it. It's all fine. I don't want your money in that regard. I only want money from people who have money. And anyway, I hope you have a nice week or rest of the week or whatever. And yeah, if you want to know more, this is like where you can find it. And also like there will be links to additional videos that exist or will be existing once I'm done with this one, that you can watch. And yeah, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Wishlist Virtuous Heaven, please do it. Tell your friends to wishlist it, and at some point in the future to also buy it, but that's still a bit far away. But anyway, I hope you have a nice day and see you around. Bye.